The House of Habsburg may have ruled over Austria the longest, but they weren't from Central Europe. Their roots stem from Alsace, a former part of Germany. The house got its name from Habsburg Castle, meaning Hawk's Nest. It is a fortress that was built in 1020s in present-day Switzerland by Count Radbod. His grandson Otto II was the first to add Count of Habsburg to his title. At first, the House of Habsburg was one of the many powerful houses of Germany, but this changed in 1273, when Rudolf I became King of Germany. His power had eventually surpassed that of his fellow lords. Rudolf acquired the Duchy of Austria in 1282 at the Diet of Augsburg, thus establishing the Austrian hereditary lands. This was when the Habsburgs took control over Austria. In the following years, the Habsburgs utilized marriage to expand their territory. Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I married Mary of Burgundy, thus bringing the Burgundian Netherlands into the Habsburg inheritance. Their son, Philip the Handsome, married Joanna the Mad. She was believed to have had schizophrenia. Their son, Charles V, inherited the Habsburg Netherlands in 1506, Habsburg Spain in 1516, and Habsburg Austria in 1519. This means that there were 3 marriages in 3 generations that led to 3 massive inheritances. Charles V. Charles V was Holy Roman Emperor, King of Spain, Archduke of Austria, and Duke of Burgundy. His land stretched from the Philippines to Peru. He ruled an empire on which the sun never sets. He was very educated and spoke French with men, Italian with women, Spanish to God, and German to his horse. He spent most of his life defending the Holy Roman Empire from the Protestant Reformation, fighting the Ottoman Empire, and fighting France. It's estimated that he spent a quarter of his life on the road. Charles was the first to unite numerous small provinces on the Iberian Peninsula, thus giving ground to the creation of Spain as a country. In his name, Spanish conquistadors Herman Cortes and Francesco Pizarro conquered the Aztec and Inca empires. He also ratified the expedition of Ferdinand Magellan. When he abdicated, Charles split his empire into 2 parts. He left Spain, the Netherlands, and overseas colonies to his son, Philip II. And to his brother, Ferdinand, he left Austria and the Holy Roman Empire. The House of Habsburg was split into the Austrian branch and the Spanish branch. What both branches had in common was loyalty to Catholicism. Philip II was a big supporter of the Spanish Inquisition, but Ferdinand had to be more tolerant because of the threat the Ottoman Empire posed. The Habsburgs and the Ottomans had been battling for centuries, and despite the Ottoman success in reaching Vienna in 1529 and 1683, the Habsburgs prevailed. In order to consolidate their power, the Habsburgs turned to the frequent use of consanguineous marriages, or in other words, incest. Marriage between first cousins or uncle and niece was very common. The gene pool eventually became so small that the last of the Spanish line, Charles II, who was severely disabled from birth, possessed the genetic material comparable to that of a child of a brother and sister. His mother was his grandfather's niece. The Spanish branch of Habsburgs became extinct in 1700 with the death of Charles II. The House of Habsburg became extinct in the male line in 1740 with the death of Charles VI. Before his death, Charles had ensured that his daughter, Maria Theresa, would inherit his crown with the Pragmatic Sanction of 1713. Upon her ascension, the War of the Austrian Succession erupted, challenging her inheritance. It lasted from 1700 to 1748. Maria lost the Duchy of Schleswig, but kept everything else, including her crown. Maria Theresa was the only female ruler of the Habsburg dominions and the last of the direct line of Habsburgs. She made her husband, Francis I of Lorraine, into Holy Roman Emperor, gave birth to 16 children, and still successfully governed her massive country, visited all of its parts, appointed ministers, wrote decrees, made military and administrative reforms, etc. Her school reform of 1774 introduced a public school with a 6-year compulsory attendance, free teaching, and learning aids. She also abolished capital punishment and limited the use of forced labor. Although she eventually gave up trying to convert her non-Catholic subjects to Catholicism, Maria Theresa regarded both the Jews and the Protestants as a danger to the state and tried to suppress them. She was probably the most anti-Jewish monarch of her time, and once wrote of the Jews, "I know of no greater plague than this race, which on account of its deceit, usury, and avarice is driving my subjects into beggary. Therefore, as far as possible, the Jews are to be kept away and avoided." Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II was the first of the House of Habsburg-Lorraine, as the eldest son of Maria Theresa and Francis I of Lorraine. Joseph was far more tolerant than his mother. When she died, Joseph started issuing edicts. By the Edict of Toleration, he established religious equality before the law and he granted freedom of the press. Under his rule, the artistic life of Vienna rose to new heights. He harnessed new funds for orphanages, hospitals, medieval schools, and special institutions for the blind and the insane. In his social reforms, he sought the greatest good for the greatest number. He tried to rationalize government so that it could perform as effectively as possible, and he sought to achieve not only equal treatment for his subjects, but equal opportunity as well. Some scholars argued that he didn't do so out of kindness, but because that meant increased revenue of the state. Joseph withdrew most of his reforms before death. The one criticism that stands in all schools is that Joseph tried to do too much and died a disappointed man. The fall of Habsburgs. Marie Antoinette was one of 11 daughters of Maria Theresa. She was executed during the French Revolution. As nephew of Marie Antoinette, Holy Roman Emperor Francis II had familial reasons for being distrustful of the French Revolution. His attempts to fight it were unsuccessful. With the rise of Napoleonic influence in German lands, Francis took the step of resigning as Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and styling himself as Francis I of Austria in 1804. After being defeated again, he was forced to marry his daughter, Mary Louise, to Napoleon himself. A few decades later, because of the Vienna Uprising and the Hungarian Rebellion in 1848, the Habsburgs lost power. Ferdinand I of Austria was forced to abdicate. His nephew, Franz Joseph I, owed his throne to the Russian army for extinguishing the Hungarian Rebellion. In winter of 1916, in a plainly decorated room in Castle Hofburg in a war-surrounded Vienna, the life of Emperor Franz Joseph was fading. He had ruled Austria-Hungary for 68 years, which is the second longest rule of a monarch in European history. And yet, he hadn't had good fortune or success, neither in his private nor public life. As he was dying that winter eve of 1916, he could recall the tragic departure of his close family. Among them was his only son Rudolf, who had committed suicide, his wife Elizabeth, nicknamed Sissy, who had been murdered by an Italian anarchist, his brother Maximilian, who had been shot by rebels, and his successor Franz Ferdinand, who had lost his life to the bullets of Gabriela Princip. Once upon a time, the Habsburgs were the happiest dynasty in Europe, and so the saying, "Wars should lead others, you happy Austria, marry." But it is also said that the descendants pay for the sins of their ancestors. The time to pay has come. In 2 years, and after Franz Joseph's death, Austria-Hungary would disappear in the whirlwind of change, and its heir, Charles I, would end his life in poverty and exile.